What if I told you that one of the greatest magicians in history didn't spend his final years chasing fame, performing escapes, or inventing new illusions? Instead, he declared war on an entire world of psychics, seances, and supernatural claims. His name was Harry Houdini. To millions of people, he was the man who could escape anything. But behind the handcuffs and stage performances, Houdini possessed another extraordinary skill. He understood deception better than almost anyone alive. And when he entered dark seance rooms and witnessed people claiming to speak with the dead, he saw something that terrified him. Not ghosts, not spirits, but tricks. And what he uncovered would make him one of history's most unexpected investigators. By the early 1900s, Harry Houdini had already become a global sensation. Audiences packed theaters just to watch him escape from handcuffs, locked crates, and sealed tanks of water. To the public, it looked impossible, like he had somehow mastered the laws of reality itself. But Houdini knew something very different. Every escape had a method, every miracle had a structure, and every impossible moment had a hidden explanation. He didn't see magic as supernatural. He saw it as deception, carefully designed to control what people noticed and what they were never meant to see. And that understanding made him dangerous to a growing belief system. Around the same time, something else was spreading rapidly across America and Europe, a movement called Spiritualism. In dark rooms, people gathered around wooden tables, holding hands in silence, waiting. Mediums claimed they could speak to the dead. Knocks came from nowhere. Objects moved without touch. Voices seemed to appear inside the darkness itself. To grieving families, it didn't feel like entertainment. It felt like hope. It felt like proof that death wasn't the end. But Houdini began to notice something disturbing. The same patterns kept repeating, over and over again. Controlled lighting, predictable reactions, carefully timed moments of surprise, small techniques that guided attention exactly where it needed to go, methods he had seen before, on stage. And as he watched more of these seances, that feeling grew stronger, because every detail, every reaction, every impossible event felt structured, not random, not supernatural. And slowly, one question began forming in his mind. What if the impossible wasn't happening at all? What if it was being performed? In the early 1900s, a new belief was spreading rapidly across America and Europe, a movement called Spiritualism. In darkened rooms, people gathered around wooden tables, holding hands in silence while mediums claimed they could speak to the dead. It was a world built on hope, grief, and the desire to believe that death wasn't the end. In these seances, strange things were said to happen. Knocks echoed from empty corners. Objects shifted without anyone touching them. And voices seemed to come from the darkness itself. To grieving families, it didn't feel like entertainment. It felt real. It felt like connection. It felt like proof. But behind the mystery, something else was forming. Harry Houdini began studying these events closely, and he noticed something disturbing. The same patterns kept appearing again and again. Controlled lighting, predictable reactions, and carefully timed moments designed to guide attention exactly where it needed to go. Subtle techniques that made the impossible feel real. Methods he had seen before, not in the spirit world, but on stage. And slowly, one question began to form in his mind. What if none of this was supernatural at all? What if it was being performed? Everything began to change for Harry Houdini after a personal tragedy. His mother, Cecilia Houdini, passed away, and the loss devastated him. They had been incredibly close, and her death left a silence in his life that he could not ignore. Like many people dealing with grief, Houdini found himself drawn toward the very world he had been questioning, spiritualism. He started attending seances himself, not as a performer, but as a son searching for answers. He wanted to believe there was still some way to reach his mother, even if it was only for a moment. But what he experienced did not bring comfort. The messages were vague. The responses felt rehearsed. The results seemed too controlled, too predictable, almost as if they were following a hidden script. And slowly, something began to disturb him. Instead of feeling like a genuine connection to the dead, it felt like a performance. The same techniques he had seen on stage seemed to appear everywhere. Darkness was used to hide movement. Silence was used to build expectation. Small signals guided attention exactly where it needed to go. Then came the realization that changed everything. If these methods could convince grieving people that they were speaking to lost loved ones, then this wasn't simply illusion. It was deception. From that moment on, Houdini stopped being only a performer who studied tricks. He became something else entirely. He became an investigator. After that realization, Houdini stopped attending seances as a grieving observer and started returning as something else entirely. He came back with a purpose. He began attending seances not to believe, but to observe. Every detail mattered now. The lighting, the seating arrangements, the timing of every sound and movement. He would sit quietly in the room, watching how the medium controlled attention and guided the audience into darkness, before filling that darkness with carefully staged moments of mystery. And slowly, he began doing something no one expected. He started recreating what he saw. Back in private, Houdini broke down each effect step by step. He studied how objects could move without being seen, how sounds could be created without an obvious source, and how simple tools, timing, and misdirection could make ordinary events feel supernatural. Then he compared those methods to what he had witnessed during seances, and the connections became impossible to ignore. One by one, the so-called miracles began to collapse under scrutiny. What looked like spirits in the dark often came down to hidden assistance, controlled environments, or deliberate manipulation of perception. Houdini realized something important. These were not rare supernatural events. They were repeatable methods. And if they were repeatable, then they were not magic at all. They were techniques. And once you understand the technique, the illusion begins to disappear. By this point, Houdini was no longer just investigating seances. He was actively breaking them apart. He began studying the most common spirit effects used by mediums around the world. Things like slate writing, where messages were supposedly written by the dead on sealed boards, but in reality could be controlled with simple sleight of hand. He examined ectoplasm, a mysterious substance that mediums claimed came from spirits, but was often nothing more than cloth, gauze, or staged material hidden on the body. He looked at spirit photography too, where ghostly figures appeared in images, created through double exposure, hidden assistance, or reused negatives. And the more he studied these methods, the clearer it became. None of these events were random. They were structured, repeatable, and carefully designed to produce the same reaction every time: belief. Even table movements and levitation claims could often be explained through hidden pressure, staged setups, or people working together in complete darkness. Houdini realized something important. The supernatural wasn't a single mystery. It was a collection of techniques. And once those techniques were understood, the illusion stopped being powerful. Because nothing feels magical once you know how it's done. By this point, Houdini was no longer investigating in silence. He began speaking publicly, standing in front of audiences and explaining how many of these so-called supernatural events were created through simple, repeatable techniques. He demonstrated how mediums controlled attention, how darkness was used to hide movement, and how audiences could be guided into believing something that wasn't there. But not everyone welcomed his message. As Houdini exposed more of these methods, spiritualists began pushing back. Some accused him of attacking their beliefs. Others claimed he was wrong, or even dangerous for challenging what people believed to be real. The more he revealed, the more intense the backlash became. Newspapers began covering the controversy, turning it into public debate. On one side, Houdini and other skeptics argued that these were tricks and deception. On the other, believers insisted they were witnessing something beyond explanation. And in the middle of it all, the line between truth and belief began to blur. But Houdini didn't stop. He continued documenting everything he uncovered, determined to prove that these miracles were not supernatural at all, but carefully constructed illusions. Yet the more he exposed, the more resistance he faced. And soon, this wasn't just about magic anymore. It was about belief itself. By this point, Houdini was no longer just exposing tricks in public. He began documenting everything he had learned in detail, carefully breaking down the methods used in seances and spiritualist performances. He wrote about how darkness was used to hide movement, how attention could be controlled through timing, and how simple techniques could create experiences that felt supernatural. His work eventually became formalized in writing, including detailed explanations of how these illusions operated behind the scenes. In these writings, he showed that many so-called spiritual phenomena could be recreated using known stage methods. Hidden assistance, controlled environments, and psychological misdirection were often enough to produce the exact same results that audiences believed were real communication with the dead. As his evidence spread, it began to reach wider audiences. Newspapers discussed his claims, and public demonstrations reinforced his arguments. When people saw the techniques explained and then witnessed similar effects in real time, the illusions started to weaken. What once felt like undeniable proof of the supernatural now looked like structured performance, and the more carefully he documented it, the clearer it became. These weren't mysteries waiting to be solved. They were systems waiting to be understood. And once understood, they stopped being miracles at all. The deeper Houdini looked into spiritualism, the more he realized something important. The people attending these seances were not foolish. They were grieving. They had lost parents, children, husbands, wives, and friends. They wanted answers. They wanted comfort. And more than anything, they wanted to believe that the people they loved were not truly gone. Houdini understood this better than most. He had experienced that same loss himself. He knew how powerful hope could be, and how desperately people search for meaning during tragedy. But he also understood something else. The human mind is incredibly easy to influence. Our attention can be guided. Our memories can be shaped. We often see what we expect to see and hear what we hope to hear. That is what made these performances so powerful. They didn't succeed because people were unintelligent. They succeeded because they appealed to something deeply human: the need for connection, meaning, and hope. To Houdini, this was the real danger. Not the tricks themselves, but how easily belief could overcome evidence. And perhaps that is why his investigation still matters today. Because the methods may change, but human nature rarely does. By the end of his life, Harry Houdini had become much more than an escape artist. He was a performer, an investigator, and a man who spent years trying to understand why people believe extraordinary things. He knew that magic could amaze us, but he also knew that our minds can be guided, influenced, and sometimes deceived. His fight against fraudulent mediums was never simply about proving tricks wrong. It was about protecting people who were vulnerable and grieving. Nearly a century later, Houdini's story still feels surprisingly modern. We still encounter claims that seem impossible, stories that spread because they offer hope, and experiences that feel real even when they are built on illusion. The methods may have changed, but human nature has not. We still want answers. We still seek meaning. And we still want to believe that there is something beyond what we can see. Perhaps that is why Houdini's investigation continues to matter. Because his greatest lesson wasn't that people are foolish. It was that all of us can be fooled, especially when something speaks to our hopes, our fears, and our deepest emotions. And maybe the most extraordinary thing about Harry Houdini isn't that he escaped from chains or locked boxes. It's that he spent his life trying to help people escape from illusions of a different kind. And if stories like this interest you, there are many more hidden histories and untold investigations just like this waiting in the next video.